In the very beginning, the only reason why we started the company is because I could see the possibilities. It started actually with a couple of people that were very interested in the technology and want to drive this project within the system. Discovered quite early on that the results were as we expected. And then the confidence grew within the NHS, and one trust spread to another trust and so on because they heard about the results. The service right now is a brain stimulation headset combined with a behavioral training program, which is written by clinical psychologists. It's also written from an empowering point of view. We want you to feel that you're in control of this disease.
Hey everybody, delighted to be joined by Daniel Mansson, who is Chief Clinical Officer of Flow Neuroscience. And if you haven't heard of Flow Neuroscience, firstly, where have you been? But it is a Class 2A medical device. It's a headset, kind of a headset. I don't know if that's the right description actually, but we can talk about that, Daniel. But it's for the treatment of unipolar major depressive disorder in adults. So it's an alternative to drug therapy, and it uses a technology called TDCS, which is transcranial direct current stimulation, which delivers 2 milliamps, milliamps,
Yeah.
milliamps, to the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is crucial for emotional regulation. So, Daniel, whereabouts are you based? Where are you speaking to us from? Are you still based in Sweden? I know you've got a global company now. So, where do you like to base yourself?
So I base myself, and my co-founder is also here in Malmö in Sweden. So that's next to Copenhagen, which is more people know about that, the capital Denmark, but it's just across the bridge here, so very close to Copenhagen, but in Sweden.
Very nice. So, I imagine that's where you grew up, right?
No, it isn't actually. It's like 20 miles, Swedish miles south from. So Malmö is south from Växjö, which is where I grew up.
Oh, wow. So, what takes someone from a place like that in Sweden to owning a global neuroscience company or neurotech company that's now making all of this impact? Where does the journey start for you? What made you interested in the sciences or getting involved in this specifically? Where does this journey start for you?
Yeah, it's as you could imagine from many other interviews with entrepreneurs. It's a kind of up and down kind of journey. Of course, it started in a quite small town. Growing up with two parents and two siblings, which are older than mine than me, and quite entrepreneurial home. So my father ran a business, always worked for himself, but in the construction businesses, a little bit of IT and so on. But I was always around that kind of environment. And the same is true for my brother and my sister, who are both have been CEOs for smaller
Wow.
companies. Yeah,
Wow.
which is a little bit strange actually, because when you meet them, you don't get that vibe at all. But not a very academic home, but still decided very early on that I wanted to study psychology.
Okay.
Basically, when I was 14, 15, something like that, and decided that I wanted to kind of explore what I felt was the real emotions of people. So I saw people acting in a certain way and saying something different very early on. So I wanted to explore what is the real driver of action in people. So that's why I started studying at the very beginning Freud. Started reading Freud. And didn't really understand it, of course, but was very fascinated by both Freud and Jung and all of this that old guard.
So, do you believe in
Um,
free will?
I don't know, not on a
Interesting.
philosophical level. No, I'm a big reader of this Stanford primatologist, I believe he is, who wrote a recent book about free will, and I'm a big believer in what he says about free will, that it's a deterministic process and so on. with complexities around quantum theory and so on, but it's still at the very highest level, I believe it's deterministic.
Interesting. So what next?
I was also very interested in computer science, so I started building computers and doing some programming and so on, and hacking was a big interest of mine. White hat mostly. So when I was 19, I took a bachelor in computer science at university. So uh, very interested in that, but discovered quite early on that this was not my kind of passion. So then took a brief stint into the construction business together with my father. We started a company with a new type of construction method, you could say, where you build in solid wood. But then really understood that, okay, it's psychology that I want to do. So fast forward, took a psychology degree as a clinical psychologist, practiced for about 2 years, worked in Norway in a hospital there, a psychiatric hospital. And for different reasons, I came in contact with Eric, my co-founder, who was then leaving a startup, you could say, a very well-funded startup in Silicon Valley, and came home to Sweden, and we decided to start this company. So that's like a very compressed version, obviously, of my of my life up until 30, but that's the way it started.
When you mentioned hacking, you said white hat. What does that mean?
Yeah, so it's a term that you use in that space where you can have you can be a black hat, I mean, taking down like government systems,
Oh, right. Okay.
hacking, like proper hacking, illegal stuff, and then you can be a gray hat, which is kind of in the middle,
Oh,
and the white
interesting.
hat is more like you learn systems and you understand like how you do. I don't know, back in the days, it was like buffer overflows. You could do like writing over memory and stuff like that. So you can get into other
Oh,
processes in the
right.
system and stuff.
So it's
So
just your
just
way of
learning.
saying, I do nothing illegal. That was just your way of saying
Exactly.
that.
Exactly.
Nice. What's the difference in the type of people that do black versus grey versus white, psychologically speaking?
I think it's the same difference as you have with any type of criminal person versus someone who's just interested in security. I mean, you can do lock picking for fun, and you can do lock picking because you want to steal other people's stuff. And I guess if I want to do if you want to do a deeper psychological kind of persona of them, I would say that it's a little bit understanding consequences and morality, and having the feeling of morality. So we're going to psychopathology. In a psychopath, for example, could go over those lines, but another person would feel bad if he did that. So.
When you did the degree in computer science, coming from psychology, did you have an appreciation for, or what did you learn about perhaps the way we're building AI and computers and how that relates to psychology? Because I had a conversation with someone recently that said in the pursuit of building AI, we're sort of learning more about how our own brains work because we're having to put this artificial system in place that is almost mimicking how we think. And in the universe, a knife can't cut itself, fire can't burn itself, and trying to create AI to understand ourselves is perhaps a bit of a fool's errand. But did you find a link between the two? Did you find an interest between the two of computer science and psychology?
Yes, definitely. I started the other way around. So I studied, I mean, I read Freud and stuff like that in the beginning, but not in a formal university kind of way
Oh, I see.
until after I did the computer science stuff. But I would say that definitely, I remember a session that we did on psychoanalysis, and we sat together in a room during my education as a psychologist, and we sat together in a room, and people, or the teacher asked us why we choose this field, and people had all sorts of reasons, but I stood out a little bit because I said I really want to understand systems, which was not really what they expected. And that came directly from the computer science stuff. I wanted to understand. I studied specifically computer networks,
Ah, yes.
and the Cisco education. So I'm a Cisco certified network professional, um, but it's way back, right? So it's basically an understanding of of systems, how they interact together, and how information is flowing and stuff like that. That then was quite helpful actually when I tried to approach the understanding of a part of psychology, at least the more neuro parts of neurology and even on the computational side that we can come to later. But Eric and I met at the computational neuroscience department at the KTH, which is a technical school. So everything like ties together. Obviously, there's a big part of psychology that has much more to do with having rapport with the person and understanding emotions and so on. That's a little bit less connected to this system. But to answer your question, I think they're married very nicely together.
Mm. So, where did your thought process start to come in that a different type of therapy could be used for depression? Where did the idea for flow neuroscience start?
So I would say that it starts actually in an incubator during my psychology studies. And there, during the summer, I had a project. It was a software development project that had to do with testing, intelligence testing. During that time, I saw a product ad for a type of equipment that delivered this type of current that we're working with right now. And I was just very intrigued, and I thought, okay, what is this? So I started researching it, and then fast forward, I did my master thesis on this technology. So we use this technology in order to enhance attentiveness in people with difficulty, yeah, had difficulty with attention. So the whole spectrum, mild to up to ADHD as a diagnosis. So we got some interesting results there, and based on that, I started traveling the world, um, and went to the different scientific conferences. I remember being in New York a couple of weeks and doing a kind of a training s- workshops and so on in this technology, and then I went to Göttingen, which is basically the starting grounds for this technology in Germany, and many other different places, and then understood very clearly that this is a very emerging, very interesting field. It's growing quickly. The science that is coming out of it is very thorough, but it hasn't really been published yet. So it was like in the very, very beginning, the trials were done, but they hadn't published yet. And came into contact with some professors there and up and coming researchers that were really clever people. And I thought, okay, this is very interesting. So this is kind of how it started in my mind, that this could become something that could be not a rival, but another tool in the toolbox for
Mm.
treating this disease on scale.
And is that because you had a hypothesis around an area of hypoactivity that was connected to depression? Was that was that clear science at the time that you thought, okay, there's a technology here that can stimulate a region. There's a region that needs stimulating. Therefore, we could do that with depression. Is that what you linked together?
I wouldn't say it was that sophisticated in the very beginning.
Okay.
I, of course, knew the theory around what the technology was supposed to do, that you increase the activity in the form of firing neurons,
Mm.
um, and also knew about the long-term effects in the form of LTP and LTD in other areas of the brain. So we can get into that also, but long-term potentiation and long-term depression of activity. Um, but I think at that point it was more like the safety profile of this is really, really good. Even then, it was clear that if you look at the antidepressants, you have so many people with these like sexual problems, which is a really, really difficult thing for many people, and weight gain and many other different things that people have just come to accept. And of course, if you go out of depression, it might mean, I mean, that's a great risk benefit kind of analysis that you're doing and an outcome. But it doesn't have to be like that, was my thinking. Um, and then, of course, the effect wasn't super clear what the efficacy of this was, but that it was possibly on par with an antidepressant, which we also can discuss what those results actually mean. But that was my thinking in the very beginning. It wasn't so much theoretical, like linking
Sure.
this to that. It was more like a very practical approach to it.
Sure. And that practicality starts seemingly with the fact that you are able to stimulate the brain with a small amount of current and you could increase attention in people. And looking at people with attention deficit and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, so ADHD, that must have been a very, as you say, it was very early, but very, very interesting for someone that's clearly from an entrepreneurial family, entrepreneurial minded, and is thinking about where this could be used in other things that you're interested in, like depression. But that I'm thinking now again from a medic's point of view that we're trained to be cynical about these types of things, right? So
Oh yeah.
to hear about a microcurrent through a headset, and now you've genuinely changed an expression of somebody. You've changed
Yes.
something in the brain so much that something that we have pathologized, i.e., ADHD, can now actually be, somewhat solved. That's a really, I mean, quite powerful link, right? To
Yes.
to
Yes.
see that at the first for the first time. Were you cynical at all to begin with, and what
Oh
did
yeah.
you okay, so what did you need to do? And I guess I'm speaking from an audience challenge here point of view. Like there's going to be many people listening that will Google Flow Neuroscience, they'll see the headset, and
Mhm.
it's like, okay, cool, this is going to do something to treat depression, right? So you've overcome some sort of cynicism in that part when you were looking at it for ADHD. So can you talk me through like what you went through in your own mind in that period and how you came round to appreciating the efficacy of it?
Yeah, you're ready for a long one here.
I
um, so
think
so
this is
Eric,
important though, Daniel.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think
Oh,
I
I
think this
agree.
is a really important part.
I have to stress something here. I started this company with Eric, who's a computational neuroscientist, very theoretical, does not have a clinical background, very thorough thinker, logical person. If it wasn't for Eric, we would have never started this company. We would have never come this far. Obviously, he's been the most important decision, if I may say so, that I made during this journey. He's been great. We are both super skeptical people, especially when it comes to scientific claims. And we have had so many discussions. So to answer your question, in the very beginning, the only reason why we started the company is because I come from this entrepreneurial family. I could see the possibilities.
Mm.
So I could see the possibilities that, okay, it kind of makes sense. It kind of like the science is reasonably good to take a chance on. The safety looks good, and you also have to understand the history of like the ECT and so on. So that
Oh.
kind of safety discussion goes into what we believed could be a very safe method to be
And
used. So
just for listeners here, Daniel, I think ECT is something that's just worth like spending a minute on here. ECT, for those people that don't know, if I've got this right from my medical training, is electroconvulsive therapy, which we had to see as medical students. We had to get it signed off. And it's a treatment, I believe, for almost treatment resistant depression, where
yeah, very
you
severe
are
patients.
Yes, where you're essentially, you're essentially electrocuting a patient under anesthesia. Like you're delivering a lot of electricity to the point where they convulse, where they fit. They fit like similar to an epileptic seizure. They have a seizure under anesthetic, and then you wake them up. And explanations, again pulling from a long time ago, this was now, but of resetting certain areas of the brain and that kind of thing. I'm going to butcher that. You'll know it much better than me. But worth pointing out that for treatment or drug treatment resistant therapy, this is where you could go to this, and it does not seem a pleasant treatment to be part of. Whilst it might work in some cases, like it feels very, I don't know, like it feels like Victorian or very, very sort of
Yeah, yeah.
odd that we still do this. It's almost in the sort of lobotomizing category, that it seems a bit barbaric for what we should be able to do with science and technology now. So I think anything that contributes to us perhaps not needing such a therapy, certainly for me, feels like progress.
Yeah, yeah. And it feels like that. I just have to add that it's the most effective treatment that we have in the mood
Wow.
disorders category. The effect
Wow.
sizes are crazy. Okay, so it's
Wow.
a very, very effective treatment. Most people don't know about this, but if you look at Sweden, actually have one of the best quality registers from ECT treatments in the world, and the effect sizes for this treatment compared to a placebo, for example, is very, very high. It comes with side effects, and that is a long discussion in itself. But it's a and I should also say that this is 800 milliamps, and as you said, the purpose is to have this electroconvulsive effect, right? And ours is 2.0 milliamps, so it's not even on the same scale. Um, but ECT is something that you can use when you talk about safety, because we have these long-term kind of registers when it comes to safety of delivering this amount of current. And then you go down 400 times, and then you're at our level. So that's very useful. But so coming back to that kind of approach, I would say that the safety profile very, very good, and the efficacy is still at that point in time something that we're discussing. But yeah, a very promising
Mm.
technology back then.
What helped you overcome your cynicism for it? Was it seeing the results of what you were seeing in increase of attention, or was it partaking in research yourself and seeing it that way? How did you overcome that cynicism?
Yeah, and I told you in the beginning of this story that you're ready for a long one, because I would say that, and I remember it quite clear. It was a discussion that we had during a dinner, um, and it was maybe 2 years ago or something like that, where we finally decided, me and Eric, that now we are 100% convinced that this is an effective treatment. That's 2 years ago in a 10-year journey with the company. Not that we would release anything to patients that we weren't convinced has a probable effect, and that where the safety is 100% controlled. It was never like that. But we had a very high standard and a very high rigor when we talk to each other, and with other people in the company, of course, about when we finally believe that this is actually, and it's connected to the trials. So it's
Mm.
connected to the pivotal trial that we got published now in October of 2024 in Nature Medicine. But obviously, we know the results a lot earlier than that. And that was a very, very rigorous study. And we were, it was a research led study. It was done at the University of East London, and one site in the United States. And they wrote the protocol and did all the analysis and everything. It was a fully
Mm.
disconnected study like that, but we funded it, so we obviously had input on the protocol, and we know it was a we knew it was a very, very rigorous study.
Mm.
So at that point, to answer your question, then we know this is the real
Yeah.
deal.
So let's talk about that then. Let's talk about the way that you administer the 2 milliamps and the that science of the headset. What part of the brain is it working on? Exactly how is it working? What is it doing? And then we can talk about some of those numbers in the study because, again, I think that's quite important.
I think you told me before this interview started that I should be clear when I'm not certain about something because it's important. And
We like being authentic on this, Daniel.
yes, I fully agree with that. So I should say that we have a bunch of good hypotheses about how it works. The main one being that you apply current, in this case, to the, as you said, left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And what it does is that the hypothesis says, pushes the neuron into a position where it's easier for it to fire. So you have this potential between the inner parts and the outer parts of the neuron, and if you reach a certain threshold, it fires, right? And it fires because you get inputs through the dendrites down to the core of the neuron, the soma, and we apply the current so that this threshold, not the threshold changes, but the potential between it changes. So it's easy for it to fire, easily put. And that's the hypothesis. But then there are other hypotheses that has to do with how does it actually, is it really the current just applied to the soma, or does it have to do something with the vascular activity, so that you increase the blood flow instead, and that increases? So it's we're not 100% certain about it, but we know for a fact that if you apply current like this, you can see the activity in this area go up. You can see it with EEG. You
Right.
can see it with blood flow in the form of fMRI studies. You
Yeah.
can see it in modeling. So you can model a brain in the computer, which is basically what we did at KTH, me and Eric. And you can apply the current from a computational kind of perspective, and then you can see that the activity goes up. And you can also do what they did in the very beginning, which is that they use TMS first. And if you point at TMS coil, maybe for the listeners, TMS is transcranial magnetic stimulation. So it's a little bit more powerful in the sense that you can get the neurons to fire without any type of other input, which is also used for treating treatment-resistant depression. And if you apply TMS on the motor cortex, you can clearly see that if you hit the right spot, you can get the finger to twitch.
Right.
And so you can prove that you can actually get to that area. So you can see it in the finger, it twitches. But in order to show that TDCS works, they first applied TDCS to this area and then applied TMS, and you get a stronger twitch. So you've primed the kind of area, so you can prove in that sense that it actually reaches the brain. Now that is for the
Yes.
motor cortex, and there's been discussions about does that actually work on all areas of the brain and so on, but we will leave that for now. But there are many different ways of showing that it reaches the brain and so on. Then you can start talking about, like, how does that become a behavioral outcome? And as I said before, that's a big leap. And the only thing that I can think of, the only way that I can think of in order to prove that that's actually happening is to do a rigorous placebo-controlled, double-blinded or triple-blinded study on the population that you want to measure it for, uh, properly powered, multi-center, great clinicians doing it, and have scrutiny in the form of a good publication that publishes it. And if you show statistical and clinically significant result between the groups, then you have effects.
And I'll read this out for you because then it seems slightly less partial. I've
Mhm.
read the study.
Yeah.
The trial was 10 weeks. It was I believe, the biggest of its kind. It was US and UK patients, but 57.5% of patients in the treatment group, of course, went into remission. So so they were in remission, which means that they no longer had depression clinically. 64% had an improvement in symptoms of at least 50%. And patients who took the course of treatment were twice as likely to see their depression go into remission than those in the control group who had the headset on, but it remained switched off. And of course, when we talk about impact factor in the journal that published it, there's not much better, if any, than Nature Medicine. So, to your point, this works according to this study, which, as you say, placebo-controlled randomized clinical trial. I also want to just touch on the mechanisms that you talked about and the fact that we don't know. It's okay that we don't know, first of all. And I think this is part of being, of course, it is part of being in a frontier of medicine. If you're at a frontier of medicine, you are breaking new ground, you are learning new things. You don't know, and that is okay. The point is, you've checked the safety of it, and then you've conducted research to see that at this kind of level, does it work? I think that's interesting. Now, being at a frontier of medicine, you also have to be open-minded. And I think this is one thing that's kind of at odds, I think, with being a clinician sometimes, that we're so fearful of things we don't understand sometimes, because ultimately we care about patient safety.
Yes.
And we care about not wasting resource on things that might not work, or there's always the placebo effect conversation and things like that. But again, I remind people we still don't really know how anesthetic drugs work. So I think anything that involves the brain is such a poorly understood beacon of consciousness, whatever on earth the brain is, the thing that connects us to everything else and gives us an experience and gives us consciousness and controls everything in our body. It's unbelievable how little we understand of actually what the brain is and what the brain does. That I think to be at a point where you're having to come up with hypotheses and test them, all I think that shows is that you're at a frontier of medicine. I don't genuinely believe that gives anyone the right to kind of question it in the way that it will often get questioned by people that don't necessarily understand it. So I think it's fascinating for that reason, which is why I've followed Flow Neuroscience for quite a while. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about next is, it's not just for me to say that, and it's not just for us to say, like, okay, we had a study, it was great. It then becomes, okay, now what impact can be made with this? What happens in real world? Because obviously, real world evidence and things being slightly different to trial settings. But I will add, I looked at your website, and you have 5 NHS services using Flow. So can you tell me a little bit about that? Can you tell me how that came about, how they are using it for their populations? Is it first line? Is it within the clinical pathway somewhere? How and how did they become confident? Was it on the back of this? Was it on the back of this trial?
It's a long journey there also. We decided very early on in the company's beginning that we were going to go to the UK first. We ditched Sweden because we because we found a lot of resistance here that we didn't really find in the UK. So that we were very happy about that. We started, I would say, the journey with the NHS about 3 years ago, something like that. And it started it started actually with a couple of people that were very interested in the technology and wanted to drive this project within the
Oh,
system.
interesting. So sort of
Yeah,
champions from within the NHS.
champions, definitely. We have a lot to thank them for. And they started out with suggesting smaller pilots where we provided the equipment, but they set up the study and provided the patient and so on. They did the actual treatment and education and so on. So started out small, did some very early publications, not on the Nature Medicine kind of scale
Sure.
in rigorousness, but more like feasibility trials,
Mm,
see if we can get clinicians to use it, what kind of impact it has in the system, and so on. Discovered quite early on that the results were as we expected from a real world. It's like it was good result. What we didn't expect was that when we then moved on to these crisis teams with really severely depressed patients with chronic depression, like had depression for 15, 20 years, had problems with suicide thoughts and even behavior. We got some really great results in these teams also. And then the confidence grew within the NHS, and one trust spread to another trust and so on because they heard about the results and so on. But it takes a long time. Then the budget question is another thing. So I think we have it isn't. I think it's seven actually, seven trusts that are using it, but on different levels. So we are reimbursed in one, I believe, or maybe two. But the one is a very important one. Is the practitioner health trust. So it's basically for the clinicians within the NHS that want to be treated somewhere else because of confidentiality things and so on. They can get treated in this trust, the way I understand it, and then we're offering that to the clinicians. So very happy about that. It will take a long time because of everything that's going on within the NHS and so on. But we are a little bit surprised actually on how in that context how quick it actually goes with spreading the word. So we're very happy about that collaboration and try to nourish it as much as we
mm.
can.
And are you aiming to have flow as first line? I suppose because of the lack of side effects and lack of safety issues and things like that, it fits quite well as try this first before anything else. And so I'm just wondering, where do you
Mhm.
see it in the clinical pathway of someone with depressive symptoms? And I suppose as part of that as well, what is the relationship between flow and antidepressant drugs, if there is one? Are they contraindicated? Are they beneficial with? Has that been looked at? Are you trying to eradicate them completely and the need for them completely? Like what's the relationship like? But first of all, the pathway, and then secondly on the antidepressant.
Yeah. So first about the pathway, logically, because of the safety profile and the efficacy that seems to be, we don't have any head-to-head trials yet, but it seems to be on par when we talk about effect sizes, which are
Interesting.
in honesty difficult to compare between
Sure.
trials, of course, but still they look very favorable. So from a logical point of view, yes, then it should be a first line of treatment for, let's say, mild to moderate, maybe. Then you would need a combination for severe. Then what's tactically possible, because we have to consider these things also, like where do you spend your energy, what type of evidence is needed for you to become a first line of treatment with guideline changes in different countries and so on and so forth. It's a big machine. That's a different story. But from a logical point of view, I would say that it should, in my opinion, be a first line of treatment together with other things that the
Mm,
patient can choose. We know
mm,
treatments are more effective if the patients in this area when patients can choose to their own preference. So the Nature study had basically two groups. One that got the flow treatment as a monotherapy and one that got it as an adjunctive to an antidepressant. And the antidepressant group
Ah,
had a stable dosage of an antidepressant, stable 6 weeks before starting the trial, and they didn't have what we call response, or they were obviously not in remission. They were still moderately to severely
sure.
depressed. We added on Flow to that group. And what came out of it was that the response rates and remission rates are higher for the group that first has an antidepressant that they're not responding to, and that then you add on TDCS2 or Flow, the Flow equipment. The response and remission rates are higher, like numerically, they're higher than if you have a monotherapy group. So I think it's like 70% on the MADRS, for example, go into response when you add it onto an antidepressant. But the effect size is lower. So if you compare it to the placebo, the difference is smaller if it's used as an adjunctive. So you have to decide what you think is important. So you could say that it works better for the monotherapy group because the difference between the placebo and the active is bigger, but the response rates are higher in the other group. So what I'm trying to say is that it works very well for both groups, but you get a little bit difference in the comparison to placebo.
Is there a benefit to using this technology in a preventative mindset? So what I'm thinking here is, obviously we always want to try and move healthcare to a point of prevention rather than cure. And I can appreciate what you're saying in terms of certainly the size of effect in mild and moderate once symptoms have taken hold. Is there a world in which this device is perhaps more widespread than just the purely clinical? As in, once symptoms and you've got a diagnosis, or perhaps even for those people that are starting to feel something come on, it's a grey area, I suppose, as prevention versus cure in terms of depressive symptoms. But do you see a world where this device is quite widespread and many people that perhaps don't have a specific diagnosis of depression are using this to prop up their mental health? Or is this purely effective as a clinical device once people clearly have symptoms?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and here I have to be a little bit technical because I think that, like, intuitively, I think it could be used as a preventative device. But if you're scientifically minded and you asked about effect, will it be effective in that state? Then what is effect? Effect is for me, is a rigorous trial that shows now and over time that you will have a certain outcome compared to a comparator or a placebo or some other treatment. So that's the way to prove it. And how do you prove that something is preventative? Well, the same as you would prove something in the Alzheimer's space, for example, or dementia space. It's a very long-term study, a population study where you follow the people that are doing the treatment but don't have the actual disease. So you would do brain stimulation, but you wouldn't right? And then you would have that comparator be maybe a register of some sort where you can follow other people, healthy people, that are not getting the treatment. And then you would prove that maybe 5-10 years from now. And it would be an enormous N, a big study with a lot of people, and you will get numbers that the outcome that you are going to present to a payer or a NHS or a healthcare system of some sort, and you would say, well, we can prevent this from happening at this scale, and please pay for that. It's a very, very difficult problem but if if we're just talking here, I would say that I can definitely see a situation where you could prevent it from happening. Let's say that you get some kind of indication, and maybe that indication isn't I feel worse. Maybe it is a biomarker of some sort.
Interesting.
And
Really interesting.
yeah, I can't say that much more about this because yeah, we're dabbling around in
Yeah,
that
no,
field.
sure. Of course, R&D, yeah, you're going to be doing this sorts of stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's a very interesting area, and I see a lot of things happening that looks extremely promising
Mm,
in that area. But that might be a different model. It's maybe the consumer that is paying for it,
mm,
monitoring,
yeah,
like any other tech product, a
yeah,
watch or something like that. Yeah.
yeah. It's really interesting because you're sort of granted the license to do this sort of experimentation and learning because of the safety profile. Because of the safety profile, you
Yes.
it is allowing for this, which I think is
Yes.
interesting. And it again, as a speaking of my clinical hat on, when something looks too good to be true, it often is. And so
Yes.
you're sort of feeling like where's the catch here? But
Mm,
actually,
mm.
until you find it, why not? Let's explore this and let's do so safely and make sure it is safe and all those things. But um so for those people that it does work on, can you explain to me the treatment that Flow Neuroscience as a company, the service that
Mm.
you are giving people? So going beyond the science now, that okay, yes, we can stimulate with 2 milliamps. So how many times are you doing this? What, because I've again read up that there's an activation phase, there's a strengthening phase, you have behavioral therapy that's adjunct to this as well. So how have you then taken this technology and built a service that actually delivers the outcome and the impact that you want for patients?
Yeah, so I would say that the service right now is a brain stimulation headset, as you said, combined with a behavioral training program, which is written by clinical psychologists in a very thorough way in order to get this extra kind of effect on your well-being. It's also written from an empowering point of view. We want you to feel that you're in control of this disease. Um, So that's the two components that goes out to the patient. Then we have a back end, a clinician portal. So if you want to be connected to a clinician, you can also be that, and the clinician can change the simulation schedule. So we have standard, as you said, active phase and a more maintenance phase. The clinician can change this, so they can say, we want you to do because you have more severe depression or because it's more chronic or whatever, we need to increase the amount of stimulation sessions. So that's like three components, but two that faces the patient. So that's the service together with a fantastic support team that we have that will answer any question that you might have about comorbidities, about how to use it practically, um, if you have a little bit more of a pain sensation or a little bit more sensation underneath the electrodes, then what type of stuff should I use in that case, or how should I clean my forehead and so on. So a lot of support in that sense, but that's the core service, and we have it's a little bit difficult to do science on this, but roughly around 80%, I would say, maybe even a little bit higher, comes from doing the stimulation. And this is also the only thing that we tested in the trial. So any other type of effects from behavioral therapy comes on top of these results. And then if you do the behavioral therapy program, we can see that people have an additional effect, but it could also, yeah, it has to do with how engaged you are. But the philosophy from the very beginning was you do the stimulation to get this extra energy, to get this executive control, so that you then can make changes in your
Ah,
everyday
interesting.
life.
Okay.
So that's it's still the core thinking around.
Where is the Flow Neuroscience IP within this? What part of it is yours that's unique to you versus what another company might be able to do with this technology?
I would say that TDCS, and we should be honest about this. We haven't invented TDCS. It's done by. I mean, if you go back to ECT, they have their slightly different kind of mechanism of action, or quite a lot different, but it's still current. And then that progresses, and I would say in the beginning of the 2000s, people started doing real science on transcranial direct current stimulation. So we don't own that. What we own, though, is the specificities of the headset, and a little bit different philosophy around sizing of the pads, safety mechanisms that has to do with how you deliver the current, some design things. And we actually have a quite large patent portfolio. Can't really go into the details of that, but we acquired another company which had a big portfolio. We had a quite big portfolio from the very beginning that protects personalization and a bunch of other things. So I would say that the IP is quite interesting because it's an emerging field. But obviously can't go into that much into the details around that. But it's to answer your question, the core technology you cannot own, but you can own a bunch of different things around it.
Yeah, how you do it, and also there's just the organizational knowledge of having done this for so long, and
Yeah,
somewhat of a first mover advantage to just having dealt with patients for so long with this that you guys obviously know what you're doing.
yeah. I mean, I think the real moat is the science done on this the specific headset, but also the regulatory hurdles that you need to jump through in order to get to a safe and effective place.
You guys have scaled quite successfully into multiple geographies now. Whereabouts are you in terms of your company journey? What round of funding are you at? Where are you in your funding cycle, and what are you up to next when it comes to scaling?
So I'm not sure what the official number is, to be honest, but we raised we raised a couple of rounds. The latest official one, I think, is the Series A. That was done in 2021 or something like that, and then we raised a little bit in between, and going on to our B fairly soon. A little bit active now. Also a little bit sensitive to talk about that, but and also the least interesting, I think. But still, I mean, we need. I would say this. I think that this field in general, like brain stimulation for mental health, is a really interesting field right now. We see a couple of rounds. Some are more relevant than others, with like people throwing crazy money because they have a lot of money, and then other rounds that are more relevant. And but primarily, I think the results are becoming really interesting. I expect this field to the rounds to get a lot bigger, because now there's real opportunity, and there are certain things I can't say on this podcast either, but that will be revealed soon, and that I think will push the field even further. So then you can really go up and compete, at least from an efficacy point of view, with the pharma field. And obviously it's such a much more mature business on the pharma side, and then they have the reimbursement codes ready, and everything is very much clearer than in the medtech field. But with the efficacy starting to increase, you have all the advantages of software rollouts, and you can increase the accuracy of the treatments and so on. It's very interesting. I think people will start noticing that very soon.
I think it will be interesting because I doubt we wouldn't expect a pharma company to take all this lying down either. So I wonder what activity would surface and messages to the contrary, I guess, or yeah, you can't threaten a business model that size without seeing some interesting things in the market, potentially maybe some acquisitions even, or maybe them. I mean, there's lots of different things, I guess, but rather than speculate on that.
I would say rather collaborations. We are
True.
not in
Yes.
any way. I have my wife is in the pharma industry, and I have nothing against pharma. Pharma is great. They have done great things in many aspects. So I'm not against that in any way. Um, but they need some healthy competition,
I agree.
and collaborations would be very nice also to combine a pharma, for example, with TDCS as a combined offer could also be very interesting.
It is important, and it is a field that's clearly going to grow. My friends that are GPs, particularly in primary care, are noting so many more people coming through the door with anxiety and depression, and that
Mm.
constellation of symptoms. So Daniel, it's been an absolute pleasure learning about this. As I say, I've been following Flow for honestly years and seeing what you guys have been up to, and as I say, as an open-minded ex-clinician now, I find these frontiers of medicine fascinating. I find the microbiome fascinating. I find this stimulation to the brain for treatment of depression and other mental health conditions. I find it fascinating because it's areas of science we don't know. It's areas of science we don't truly understand. I think it's part of the reason that I was drawn to anesthetics in a way, because I used to tell people when they asked me, what do you do for a job? I used to say I manipulate consciousness for a living. And people would people would look at me as if to say, what on earth do you do? But it was true. Like, that's literally true. I mean, I did other things while consciousness was eliminated for a little while, but medically, to keep someone alive while someone did something else to them.
Yeah.
But the truth and the reality is I manipulated consciousness for a living, and I found it fascinating. I found it fascinating how much we did not know, but it gave me this open-mindedness to mechanisms of action that we just don't understand yet. And in a very simple thought experiment, when you fast forward 100, 1,000, 10,000 years, are we going to learn more? Yes. Are we going to do things differently? Yes. So by definition, we are going to go through areas that we did not understand before that we're going to understand in future. And which is why I've had such an open-mindedness to this and really enjoyed watching what you guys have been up to. That's a little bit of what excites me, but I'm interested for you in terms of what you're up to now. I know there's plenty that you want to keep under wraps, but what's exciting for you at the moment? Is it a particular application of the technology? Is it a particular result? Is it something that you guys have got planned? What is it right now that you think is really exciting? And in fact, actually, did I see a different version of the technology coming out recently, like a specific TDS or a hyper TDS? I'm sure I saw something that was a more specific version
From
of this
us.
to a specific, not from you guys, from elsewhere. That might not be
Mhm.
something that's come across your desk. I'll find it and send it to you if not. But
Okay.
yeah, is there anything that's particularly exciting you at the moment?
Yeah, what's particularly exciting to me is to become more and more precise in how we treat, and that's a general statement. And I know general statements are not that exciting, but let's say that in the quite near future, I would imagine that we can clearly tell a patient, doesn't even have to be the clinician, but tell a patient that yes, this is going to work for you.
Mm.
And in the case where we say, no, it's not going to work for you, we can say, but this is going to work for you. So I don't imagine one solution to fix everything, but I imagine that we fairly soon will be able to tell for most people that this is going to work for you or this is not going to work for you. And then you obviously can decide for yourself what you want to do, but it will become very clear what you should do.
Mm.
And that excites me a lot.
Yeah, it is. And that's also part of the responsibility of being frontline, because I think a lot of people are going to come to you wanting a device, wanting treatment, wanting to take it all away, and perhaps they're not right for it, and having the confidence and the ethics and the morality to actually, say, no, this isn't going to work, but this might, or this could, but if it doesn't, we're going to need to adjunct with this, or this is all part of, I suppose, the responsibility of knowing that, you have the safe option here that can be used first line. Therefore, there's going to be a lot of, I was going to say a lot of flow of patients, but forgive the pun, but there is going to be for whatever services and ways that you set this up, that might not be as an NHS service, but as B2C service and whatever. So it's, it's important. It's important. It's nice to hear actually that's the, that's what you aspire to, because I think that's true impact, isn't it? And I think we come from scientific backgrounds, and these areas of what has to be like pure integrity. Like, we want to prove it. We want to do the best for the patient. You're clinical, it's baked into us that it's really nice to hear that this is the kind of leadership that's going on behind the scenes with what you guys have got, because I think it's super exciting. And for any investors listening, I'd be trying to get into that Series B. Daniel, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. For people that want to learn more about what you guys are up to, I imagine they go to flowneuroscience.com, but have you got a LinkedIn that people can find you on?
Yeah, of course. I'm not sure what the link in, but you can find me on Daniel Mansson, connected to Flow Neuroscience, and my email is Daniel, very simply, daniel@flowneuroscience.com if you want to send something.
Perfect. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.